Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Pop Screen, the podcast that argues in English because it's neutral territory. We're that corner of the Geek show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies, either starring by or about pop stars. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a video artist who has work in Wood End Gallery's exhibition A Sense of Place, which is on until the first week in March. I also write regularly for The Geek Show and Byline Times. And I've been joined this week by
Mark Harrison. I'm a writer and quizmaster primarily for Film Stories, the magazine and the website, and various other outlets like Yahoo, Vodzilla, etc.
Nice. Now, we watched this movie at the Pictures about a year ago. We are returning to it with a bit, all of the water from last year's Oscar season fully under the bridge. Although that water was like a trickle last year compared to the white water rapids that we're getting this year.
Yeah, it's an odd one because this struck me as when we went to see it, I came out of it and said I really, really enjoyed that, and I think in any other year that would be like a front runner as far as I'm concerned. But I think it was a good year last year, certainly compared to the year of Oscars and award season stuff we have at the time of recording.
Yes, yeah. And it also has Jehnny Beth in, the former lead singer of Savages turned solo artist, who plays basically, I think, the hero of this film in as much as she saves the dog.
Yeah, it's one of those films where it's, certainly like Sandra Huller's performance and various other performances throughout were all upstaged by, God, that kid was good, and God, that dog was good. Yeah.
Yes. I have to admit, I don't know how you felt going in. I was pretty skeptical because there was a part of me that was thinking there is no way that a 2.5-hour courtroom drama is going to be even tolerable for me, let alone very good.
Yeah. Well, the thing that immediately strikes you when because we're coming to this kind of when we're talking about courtroom dramas, there's mainly American ones and, the occasional British one that are set in the American and British court systems. French jurisprudence is fucking wild, y'all. It's the style of trial where the defendant has no right to silence, and
yes,
it's just kind of chipping in at any moment. It's more really like it's like a round table on an episode of The Traitors more than it is like going back to it a year later. I watched this after a series of The Traitors UK had finished, and the same thing had just happened again. And I'm watching it going, this is just everyone shouting their feelings rather than evidence. It's all so open to interpretation, and it's mad that because this is, this might as well be in the mold of something like for a European film, for a Palme d'Or winner. This might as well be in the mold of something like Presumed Innocent, or one of those John Grisham adaptations for how entertaining it is. And a lot of that is the way the trial is set up across like 3 major sort of pivotal days in court, spread throughout the film. But I think we should probably start at the beginning and the other musical connection. And it's because we've already mentioned Jehnny Beth. We've skirted around Snoop Dogg. It was a dog called Snoop, but this kind of starts, and it's one of the things that's indelibly. The first thing that made me laugh in the film is this music choice, because it's a film that we're talking about on Pop Screen. It's a film that doesn't have a score other than certain needle drops. Be it piano pieces that that Sandra's son is playing on the piano, or more specifically, the needle drop that starts the film, which is a steel drum cover of "Pimp" by 50 Cent,
Yes.
which rattles through the film and then rattles around madly in your head afterwards, and rattles around all the way to the bloody the Oscars, where when it won Best Original Screenplay, we got the spectacle of the Oscars orchestra playing a steel drum cover of "Pimp."
Yes, big call out to the Bacau Rhythm and Steel Band, who I don't think anyone was expecting to be the breakout stars of Oscar season 2024, but in many ways they were. I mean, the first time that comes in, it's over Sandra, the lead character, being interviewed, and her husband sort of, either because he likes to listen to it when he works or out of passive aggression, this becomes a sticking point. He just starts blasting this instrumental cover of "Pimp" by 50 Cent. And the first time it happens, you just howl laughing. And it never stops being very funny, does it?
Yeah, he's playing on a loop, and I think one thing I wanted to start with talking about this scene, this opening, because firstly, what the prosecution's case rests upon is that, like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, when Homer's using his head as a bongo, she went, "I'm filled with murderous rage and island rhythms," and his subsequent fatal fall from like the third floor of their house and in the middle of Grenoble was actually murder. But in a film with so much open to interpretation, I found out something about this in researching. Do you know what the song was originally going to be?
I do not.
So this scene, which, as you say, is motivation play, whether it's to annoy it or whether it's something blast on repeat, where as a frustrated writer we can't do it. I could tell you that in the original script, it was going to be Jolene by Dolly Parton, and they couldn't get the rights, which puts a different color on it if he's playing it while his wife is talking to someone he believes she's gonna cheat
Have
on
an
him
affair
with.
with. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
very true. Yes.
yeah.
I like that as a reading, but I don't think there's any way it would have been as funny. Not least because
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
you wouldn't have got that absolutely golden
yeah.
bit
Oh,
where they're discussing it in court, and they
yeah.
say they're trying to make the case that he provoked her to the point where she killed him. They say he was playing a PIMP by 50 Cent and Snoop Dogg, a notoriously misogynistic song. And there's just this shrug afterwards of, that was the instrumental version.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's just that's the thing that they neglect to they neglect to mention that it's that it's not targeted in that way. But that's one of the things that I think in the course of development it's grown. But I would like to think that it was like, oh shit, we can't get the rights to Jolene, right? PIMP then. Just let's say the second choice. Oh, you know what we should get? We should get that 6 steel drum cover of 50 Cent, and that can be the only bit of source music we're going to play in our fucking film about
It's
French
incredible.
jurisprudence.
Yeah, that and the kids practicing piano.
Yeah, Chopin. Like, yeah.
It makes you wish that people still release soundtrack albums rather than just stuck up a Spotify playlist, because I would love this to be available for sale.
It'd be one of those ones where a lot of dialogue samples rather than tracks, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Like in between 50 Cent and Chopin, it'd just be the sassy French prosecutor and all of his nonsense. Oh God, that guy is perfectly cast.
I mean, I assume this is accidental from Justine Trier, the co-writer and director, but he does look exactly like Judge Rinder.
Yeah, there's a lot of that's the thing about he's got one of those faces that's a little bit. It looks like a lot of people. I've seen people say he has Martin Freeman's face pasted on Simon Pegg's head. But like that if you made it in if you made it in like the UK, it would be Michael Sheen. If you made it in America, it would be Billy Eichner. And yet the guy is somewhere between the two of those. Like it is performance and how, because it is a film that's open to interpretation, and I have an interpretation of it, but I think we should get to at the end. I think we should discuss the facts of the film, and we should
Yes.
maybe come down on how we interpret it all, because because this is the thing of so the husband, Samuel Molesky, is either falls or is pushed from the top of the house, falls to his death, is witnessed but not really by. Do we think does the dog get a view of what's happened? Because the dog, as we said, the dog performance is incredible all the way through this. But it's bits where the dog's looking at her, and it's like, does the dog know? But also the couple's son, Daniel is visually impaired, so it becomes in a trial that's so much about listening to people's interpretations of events and listening to audio recordings with no supporting video. It becomes kind of like from this kid's perspective, who's going to have to live with this for the rest of his life, one way or the other.
Yeah,
which really struck me out a second view and like kind of knowing where it goes. I really like kind of keyed into that this time around.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the kid's testimony is one of the strongest scenes in the film in terms of both emotion and just where it comes in the narrative. It's not quite cutting the Gordian knot, but it carries a lot more weight than all of the sort of daft bickering about 50 Cent that we've had come before it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it just comes out as this, as I said, just the French legal system being as it is, and this being, to be honest, the first time I've really seen. Go on, sorry.
I hate to say this because it's a cliche. It's a cliche I use all the time, but it is very French. It is a courtroom trial. It is just like a few days of sitting around arguing about sexual politics.
Yeah, it does come off like a round table or debate club more than it does a trial, because it's not the format we're used to seeing.
Yes.
In American films or in British films or even in the news about real life cases and all this kind of thing. It is more, we're going to sit around, we're going to have a debate about what the truth is, rather than we're going to hear both sides. We're going to hear the prosecution and the defense. It's just all happening alongside each other, and it's joist retort. Like it's.
Well, there is one moment where procedure comes into it when is it Vincent, Sandra's lawyer, says something that sounds so conclusive that he sort of has to clarify that. Oh, that's not my closing argument, by the way. I'm just sort of putting it out there.
He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't. The judge does. It's like, contrary to appearances, those weren't his closing remarks.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good, like, even that, it's a good, like, knowing send up of that type of thing in all of these sorts of films, where it's just like is music playing in your head as you say this? It's like
it reminded me very much of that episode of The Simpsons where Lionel Hutz has to be reminded that things like "I rest my case" aren't just figures of speech, that they have an actual legal meaning.
Yeah, there's a Simpsons moment for every movie, for every Oscar. It turns out there might be quite a few for this, so strap in, listeners. Probably come back to the Simpsons as we go through. Yeah, it's so it kind of ends up like when it was announced, it was kind of billed by the distributors, by the when the film was announced, long before any of the awards stuff, long before the Cannes premiere, the Palme d'Or win. It was kind of billed as a Hitchcockian procedural thriller.
Yeah,
which I guess it is. Like, it's a bit of marketing dress up, but it's like in the terms of addressing in what is still a very European, if you like, a very ambiguous film that adopts these Hitchcockian like modes of it's very entertaining, it's very stimulating and compelling, and yet never comes to a conclusive answer. Lets people make their own mind up, but leads you just enough in terms of, all right, having enjoyed a life on Earth and seeing these interactions and culture war debates happening, you could sort of infer what's actually going on in a way, I think.
I think, I was thinking today about Steven Soderbergh's film Unsane, which I didn't really enjoy because I felt like it was a binary choice thriller where either, Claire Foy's character is actually crazy or she's been set up. And that never worked for me because I couldn't believe that Soderbergh would be tone deaf enough to put out a film in 2018 where a woman sort of accuses someone of abuse and it's because she's a crazy delusional bitch. Like, obviously that's not going to happen, so you're just waiting for the inevitable. And I think the fact that this has a comparative lack of resolution means that you can sort of appreciate those moments where the prosecution are trying to paint Sandra as like this Jezebel and this sort of man-hating feminist who wants to kill her husband, and you think, oh, like, that's bullshit. But it still doesn't quite mean she's innocent. It just means that this particular argument for her guilt is bullshit. It doesn't come down explicitly on the idea of the whole case against her being wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to tap the Simpsons well again. It can be two things. Yeah,
It can indeed be two things.
It's because I think that, as I say, watching it on second viewing, and the fact that so much of it is the perspective of that kid. We certainly see scenes that the kid isn't in, where Sandra interacting with Vincent, a lawyer, or with other characters.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, that you're seeing it sort of from his perspective, you see a lot of how she interacts with him as well. And there's scenes where she's basically telling him, just tell him the truth. That can never hurt me. And then your head, you can go, maybe she's thinking, he doesn't know. But it's like, no, I'm not sure. Like, I think that these moments are the thing that these moments outside of the trial are the ones that give you the important context, which is, again, for your own interpretation. You can absolutely sit through this and watch the Judge Rinder guy with the unknowable face make his arguments, and his parade of expert witnesses. They all look like they should be like in screen caps of YouTube videos, like 20-minute long YouTube videos, complaining about how Kathleen Kennedy has ruined Hollywood or something. You can take that, and the film is not certainly not leaning you anyway. But come on, it's just when you've seen these interactions, when Judge Rinderman starts reading from one of Sandra's novels at length and saying, this is the mind of a killer. It's engaged with. It's not leading you one way or another. I don't think it can still be ambiguous. It's laid out because it's about combative interpretations, but it's also about where those characters are coming from with it. But it's so much of it is the way you see media being discussed now online.
Yes,
that kind of feeds into this. It's and certainly there's big high profile trials involving famous people that you can draw lines to as well, and that for which the idea of contempt of court seems to be suspended, and it's just open season on speculating this. There's a bit early in the film, I'm possibly commenting this earlier than I meant to, but there's a scene later in the film where Sandra's just sat in a hotel room watching telly, and it's sort of like almost like a book club type TV show rather than a current affairs program, and they're just talking about her books and about how she manages, how she's a master architect of narrative, and how that's exactly what she's doing. And a guy with this fucking smirking prick just literally says with his mouth without any self-awareness, just like, the truth is, the idea of an author murdering her husband is just more compelling than a teacher killing himself. And he just says that, and that's a thing that's allowed to roll on. And this sort of thing is happening on every TV show, every panel TV show all the time now. And the shit that's getting normalized. But it's a thing. It's a thing that strikes a note in this moment that, like, is speaks to my own biases. I might have a different view of the ending of this film than another viewer might have if they watch that panel show thing and don't think that's fucking bullshit. But the media circus around it that sort of makes a joke of the fact that it's like a fair trial. Much as inside the court everyone gets to stick their oar in, it's like it's happening from outside as well.
Triate said that part of her inspiration was the Meredith Kercher murder case, where you may remember it was one of those rare instances where it's actually quite nice to have an internet connection, because I could see that the British press were really trying to bury Amanda Knox as like this slatternly American psychopath who killed this innocent British girl. And then, of course, all the American press were like, well, I don't know, this seems pretty fishy. And it turned out the American press were right about that one, that Amanda Knox was, in fact, railroaded for much the same reason that Sandra is here, for not acting like, you would expect a traumatized victim to act based on watching films and not having much experience of the real world. But you can absolutely, as you alluded to earlier, see this as a Depp versus Heard film. It is like extremely readable in that context.
Yeah, it's sorry, dog jumped in. He's not as good a dog as Snoop. Say hello, Dexter. No, he's not. Let's try to solve it. Yeah. So the trial winds up being, as you said, everyone's kind of bringing the wrong thing to this, but it becomes almost as much a trial of her as a wife as whether or not she's a murderer. It's like, you were the breadwinner, you emasculated him, and then you also hit him with an undivulged object and knocked him 3 stories to his death. Which is worse? It's sort of like the undercurrent. It's sort of the undercurrent in this. But it's mad. I think that like you have that scene where she tells Daniel, "You just got to tell the truth."
Yeah.
And then also there's the fact that the difference between these interpretations and her interpretation, or between that and the truth, such as it is in this thing where everyone's talking on top of each other and bringing in recordings or memories of incidents and bending them one way or the other. As I say, the thing where they're reading passages out of her book, and then the defense goes to argue back on this, and they go to object. And it's like, just give me half the time you took to read a book to make this argument. But like the fact that she, in the middle of that, we haven't talked about the language aspect yet. The fact that she moves to France, she's German, her husband's French. She's moved to France after their son was had his accident that's left him visually impaired, and to her that it's not something that's going to be permanent as far as she's concerned. That, so she hasn't learned French, so there's an aspect of she doesn't speak French as well as the other characters, and then has to she's learned English, which she says is the middle ground, as you made the gag about earlier on. But it becomes about, it's playful with that sort of thing, like that she's given evidence in English, and the different interpretations can be made of language. Just if there's literal interpreters, you see the French people sort of annoyedly putting earpieces in when she switches to English, and that's all in there as well. And it's about, as I say, it's the messiness of the trial, like trying to find some version of that where everyone's kind of coming at it from a different angle and receiving things in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. The bit about her novel reading made me wonder if there was like another inspiration in here. There's a great essay by David Gran for the New Yorker, which was in his collection, The Devil and Sherlock Holmes, called True Crime, about a detective who had to solve a murder based on a sort of postmodern semi-autobiographical novel by the suspected killer, which did in fact have his character, his stand-in, kill someone in the exact way that this guy died. And the question of whether this was made into an absolutely terrible movie starring Jim Carrey, but I feel like Anatomy of a Fall is like the actual version of that we got, where that article's themes of what it means to tell the truth in a fictional context, and whether that should carry the same weight as the kind of truth that has to be established in a courtroom, is more successfully explored.
Yeah, it's just wild that it's got that thing of like pretty much anything seems to be admissible. Like it's almost a surprise when later on, after you have that very harrowing scene where Daniel tries to, on a hunch, kind of test something that would prove, the assertion that his dad made a suicide attempt by drugging his dog.
Yeah.
And good God, that dog actor, Messi, the dog actor who plays Snoop, is fucking incredible. Like plays dead in that scene.
Yeah.
Just madly, those eyes. Oh man, and the kid's amazing as well. But you get that really harrowing scene. That afterwards, Judge Rinderman is just kind of like, "Oh, that's not admissible." It's like, well, fucking everything else has been. What are you on about? It's just like, this is not documented. It's like, so was most of the other fucking stuff you brought up.
Yeah, there's a sort of running theme about animals being honest. There's a great big long track into Snoop's face after the body of Samuel's discovered.
Mm.
Uh, Sandra later says, "I can't trust someone if I can't put an animal's head on them," and they
Yeah,
discuss what animal she would be. That bit about Samuel's possible suicide from a medication overdose does have one of the movie's few sort of big stylistic flourishes. I think it's well directed, but it's like very unobtrusively directed for the most part until they're discussing that. And suddenly there's this big fly through from a bit of vomit to an
yeah,
empty aspirin pack in the bin, which is like something from Panic Room. And it's just such a lovely way of coding that as being a bit more speculative, maybe a bit more Hollywood than the rest of the film.
yeah. It's sort of, as I say, it's in a very entertaining. Well, it's not bombastic. That's the thing. Bombastic's the wrong word. As you say, it's well directed and it's quite low key in the way it presents itself. But like, yeah, it's not a hooting and hollering film in that sense of of outrageous stuff happening. But it's the fireworks are contained and interpersonal, and that you have this central thing with the son's perspective on it all. It's harrowing in that way. Like you see how much whichever you kind of have a bit that's a little bit like it later on in the film that after the verdict has been passed down, you have a bit where she sort of like decompresses and kind of realizes that like losing would have been the worst thing in the world to happen,
Yes.
but I didn't lose, I won, and there's nothing for that except it's over. Like that, there's no reward for all that. It's an odd one, isn't it? But again, that's just one of those things that you just think, oh yeah, like either way, it's a
Yeah.
lot of hard work for something that would destroy you if it didn't. Yeah, but and it's a strange one.
Yeah.
It's it's essentially unsatisfying in that you don't get an answer one way or the other, but I think it's rewarding enough in that it leaves it gives you enough to interpret it your own way.
I should point out that I did find, although I didn't read, I did find an article from, I think it was Screen Rant, which was,
Mm.
ending of Anatomy of a Fall explained, and I just thought,
Oh.
I'm not going to click on this because I want to preserve my fantasy that it's just them explaining the concept of narrative ambiguity to their readers.
That'd be lovely. But like no, that's what I was aiming for there. It's just the ending explained type thing. It's
Yeah,
pleasingly. And honestly, I'm not someone who's like, oh yeah, no, narrative ambiguity is great. Actually, I love a bit of narrative ambiguity. I like films as films to have endings, but I think that when it's so baked into this, when it's so much about the back and forth, and what I would say is I've never talked to someone who's watched this who's really hard like, oh yeah, she definitely killed him. I'd say that
yeah,
much.
yeah,
So while certainly Justine Triet's not like when she was in the press conference room at the Golden Globes, and because it's the Golden Globes, some journalists are just went, "Did she kill him?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, I'll tell you." She said something like, I'll tell you in 10 years," which is like, Screen Rant or one of these other outlets will be like, Justine Triet hints there might be an Anatomy of a Fall sequel on the way in 10 years,
yeah.
or something like that. Like,
Anatomy
what
of a
does this
Fall
mean?
Maverick.
Yeah. Yeah, she's tutoring other people who may or may not have pushed their husbands out of a window.
Well, let's talk a bit about this film's Oscar season run.
Mhm.
Um, some of these people had award successes previously. Camille Rutherford, who plays Zoe, the journalist at the start, was nominated, for a César Award in the amazingly named category Best Female Revelation. Imagine winning
Mm.
that. Um, but yeah, it did. I suppose you can never quite rule out a Palme d'Or winner in Oscar season, particularly these days. Now the Academy's a bit more international. They've got a pretty good record in predicting stuff that's going to be a player in award season.
Followed with an Aura this year as well, hasn't it? That's carried through.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. But this did feel like it sort of it just picked up steam in a really interesting way. I remember when it won the Palme d'Or, and I had a general sense that people liked it, but maybe they'd have put one or two other movies over it. You know, it was one of those Palme d'Or winners that wins because everyone agrees on it. And then it got out into the world, and it was like the anti-Amelia Perez in this sense. You know, once it escaped from that hothouse of film festival, everyone was just growingly of a mind that no, actually, this is really good. This is really good. This could go the distance, you know. And I felt like for all that year's Best Actress race was basically stone on stone. Yeah, it was Emma Stone or Lily Gladstone. No one
Mm.
else got a look in. But there was part of me that was thinking, you know, if they split each other's votes badly, you know, if Sandra Huller could get this thing.
I did think on that score at least that it's the Amy Adams thing in 2016 where she's in Arrival, Nocturnal Animals, and one of those films is
Yes.
shit. But both of those films split the vote, so she didn't win for Arrival like she should have. Guess which one of those films was shit? Anyway, but that's the Oscar politics, isn't it? Because when you get to the Oscars, even
Yeah,
though it's up for Best Picture, like France's Oscar committee didn't submit it for Best International Feature.
they're
But
wild, those guys. I would just like to sit down with them and I just want them to talk me through some things.
well, I've been they put in the taste of things instead, which I still haven't got around to watching, but it's on my list. I have heard it was good, but there was some talk of people saying that it was political, that Justine Triet was critical of Macron
Oh, right.
in her
Yeah.
acceptance speech at Cannes. So there was
Yes.
like punishment for that, but like I mean, some funny punishment. They ended up winning best screenplay. Anyway, they wound up in the proper best picture category. None of this.
Yeah,
should have put
yeah.
should
And
put more English speaking in your film. But on the multilingual thing of it, that was a question before France selected. Went with the taste of things instead. It was a question of whether or not it would be eligible because Academy rules are nebulous about this sort of thing.
yeah.
But like it's a component of the film that's crucial. Like that's different. It's one of the things that makes it so good. That it's straddling languages in the way that it
Yeah.
does. And I was reading around that Triet asked Sandra Huller not to learn French for the film
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's basically for that. But she ended up doing it anyway because she wanted to understand. She wanted that character to be able to understand what she was saying. So she did learn French just for this, even though she's not speaking an awful lot of French. And that's the sort of that's the sort of work that should get you more Oscar recognition if it's not stone on stone sort of but yeah, it's an odd one, isn't it? Because yeah, as you say, it's like it did well to. It's a breakout, by the definition of Parasite aside, for the definition of international films at the Oscars, it did well. It broke out.
No, totally. Yeah. And I think
Hmm.
sometimes people are a bit too belligerent about that kind of issue of choosing one film from each country because sometimes the one that has big letterbox traction doesn't get a straight walk into the selection, and everyone's like, "Oh, what?" Everyone was furious when Largely's Les Miserables beat Portrait of a Lady on Fire to France's
Yeah.
nomination a few years back. Les Miserables is a great film. You can argue about whether it's as great as Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I think it is, but it's not a disgrace. It's not as if they've
Yeah.
chosen something embarrassing for this.
Yeah. It's not like it's not like they've picked Amelia Perez. Anyway, but yeah, this. I'm leaving it. I'm leaving it. We're not talking about it. We'll do it in a
Well, hang
year.
on,
We'll
hang
do
on,
it in a
hang
year
on.
from now.
Before you
Yeah, I'm
leave
not.
it behind, I just want to say that uh, I was aware of Jehnny Beth as a singer, but she was also in what I guess we must now talk about as the last half-decent Jacques Audiard film, which was Paris, the 13th District, straight before this one. So it's quite weird for her to go straight from being in a film by this year's Oscar season villain to last year's Oscar season hero. Really, that is quite odd.
Yeah, it's it's no surprise that, like, I've gone through the specifics of, like, it was the sort of the canned speech that if there was a political component to that not getting selected, then it was
Yeah.
that. But awards voting is always to some degree or another political, and whether or not it was Les Miserables or Portrait of a Lady on Fire, whether or not it was this or the Taste of Things, like, the important thing is art must compete. that's, that's that's the guy you went and won. What the guy who made the first non-English language film to win Best Picture is the guy who's like, yeah, the Oscars, they're quite funny provincial awards, aren't they? it's probably a healthy attitude to have to it. Really, is that it's Hollywood's biggest night, but it's also, Jesus, it's just Hollywood's biggest night. It's in the same category as World's Most Dangerous Frog. It's
yeah, totally. And I think, Sandra Huller will have had that perspective more than anyone else because she had that phenomenal year. I mean, she's always been good, Sandra Huller, in my opinion. I'm still slightly salty that Tony Erdmann didn't win Best International Film at the Oscars that was up for. But she was part of this, and she was also part of the bit from last year's Oscars that people remember, which is Jonathan Glazer winning Best International Feature for The Zone of Interest, which she also had a lead role in. So I think she is better positioned than anyone else to realise that, this isn't so big. There were bigger things than this, and most of them were name-checked by my director in that speech.
Yeah, off the back of that, I've just gone to check that she hasn't been cast in like a B role in a Marvel movie or something off the back of the Oscars thing. She has got 2 movies out next year. She's in the new Alejandro Iñárritu film, the Tom
Okay,
Cruise
well, that
led
could
one,
go either
and
way, couldn't it?
she's also in Project Hail Mary, which is Phil Lord and Christopher Miller's adaptation of another story by the guy Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to check that Justine Triet isn't making a Marvel movie because this is just what happens out of Oscars.
She was in conversation to adapt Monica by Daniel Close, his last comic book. I think Kate Blanchett was attached to it, which having read the book, I can't quite get my head around that casting, but that's been that was like briefly mentioned in a profile of her around the time this was doing the Oscar rounds, and it has been silent for so long that I have to assume she passed on it.
Yeah, I can't see anything coming up on like Wikipedia and IMDb, at least, that she's got coming up that's been announced. But you never know; she might be doing something over at DC rather than Marvel.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, so I think Huller's gone like gently Hollywood with that. It's like that's a couple of big Hollywood projects. One of them's got Tom Cruise in, but it's not quite I am the villain in the next Marvel movie. It's not that level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you ever seen that? It's going back a bit, but have you ever seen that Funny or Die video that John Dujardin did, like after the artist at the Oscars, where it's sort of a succession of him. It's a succession of him like auditioning to be the villains in sequels and Hollywood movies. So it's him like threateningly going Kermit or Iron Man, like just like kind of delivering his threatening, to sequels to movies that have been out that year, including Tom Hanks's Larry Crown, where he's just miming, holding a head underwater, going Larry Crown, more like Larry Drown. But that is the pipeline, isn't it, for like European breakout actors? Sometimes just that you just find them villain roles or second string roles in big tentpole movies.
And it might work, who's to say, who could possibly say that they wouldn't enjoy watching Sandra Huller threaten Tom Cruise?
Yeah, that's what we want.
That's what the people want. Yeah. Bit more Jehnny Beth research. I want you. We've done the Simpsons references, and now we're doing a day-to-day one. So we're doing the full gamut of people who should just accept the 90s are over and get new cultural references. But I want you to tap into your inner Spartacus Mills and respond with an appropriate noise to each of Jehnny Beth's musical collaborators, because she's collaborated with a lot of people, and they are a very eclectic list. They include gorillas,
Oh,
Tinder sticks.
sorry, I've got some
no,
noises. Go on,
yeah,
go on. I want to make random noises. Go for it.
yeah, that's fine. Tinder sticks,
Ah,
Julian Casablancas,
oh,
Noel Gallagher,
uh,
Idols,
hmm.
Killian Murphy,
Eh?
and Bobby Gillespie.
Ah,
That's good stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
Killian Murphy, to answer your inevitable next
Yeah,
question.
what was that? Yeah.
Yeah, he reads out some poetry on what she doesn't call it solo album, she calls it a personal album because she collaborated with so many people on it. But her 2020 record, To Love Is to Live, has a spoken word piece by J. Robert Oppenheimer on it.
Right. And did Noel Gallagher do some spoken word work as well?
It could have been singing, no one can tell. I don't know what her Noel Gallagher collab was. I think she was with Gorillaz on that one Gorillaz album that I Don't Like Humans, where it's like there's a lot of collabs on there, but you've forgotten about all of the songs. So yeah, it was a bit like that. The Bobby Gillespie one was like they did a whole collaborative album that once again returned to his fetish of doing a cover version of Some Velvet Morning by Lee Hazelwood and Nancy Sinatra. And you just think, is your plan to do a different version of this every decade? What's going on here?
Let's hope so. Just check back in, yeah.
Yeah, check back in 2031. That should be enough time. But yes, I think we're close to wrapping it up because I think the only way you could say more about this film would be to kill its ambiguity, right?
Yeah, so do you think she did it?
I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to say she did push him out the window, but she was hoping he'd land on the dog. How evil is that?
Fuck me. Oh man, this sent the case in a whole new direction. It's entirely a thing. It's an odd one because it's something that, as you say, we don't puncture its ambiguity for anyone else, but like, and I don't think we could really. It's down to your own interpretation, but this does fit in, that growing thing of cinematic mysteries where you look at it and go, Lieutenant Columbo would have made short work of this, but
Yeah.
but in its address, and that everything that happens afterwards is where the drama lies. It's ultimately that, like, you can pull it's got that thing of like you could have a giant, French court case like this, or you can have an argument between two people where it's just as if you're backing away from someone, reaching behind you for anything to grab and hit the other person with. Like, it becomes the sort of like the circus of evidence that is admissible, and it is something to behold. And it's low key fucking funny. Like, aside from the 50 Cent steel drums thing all the way through, there are lots of withering one-liners that sort of hit you a moment after they've landed because it's an otherwise serious scene. And I'm really enjoyed. I found this really entertaining on a second viewing, and I wondered how it would stand up. And I was still with it all the way through, and it goes fast for a 2.5-hour film as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's got a lot of very funny things in it. I'm very fond of Judge Rinder's questioning of Zoe, where he says something like, "So Sandra, as you call her," she called Sandra, you prick.
So called Sandra. Antoine Reinhardt, we should name him instead of Rinderman, but he's very good. He's the guy I would expect to see get in a fight with Batman or something randomly in a couple of years' time. Like, he's the guy I would like to see break through in supporting roles. Just being this fucking shithouse actually guy.
Yeah. He's the guy who, based on this, I would most like to see beaten up by a big superhero.
By Batman. Yes. Yeah, it's that Riddler energy, the most punchable face.
Yes. Oh, so just remind people where they can find you online, Mark.
Yeah, so usually writing nonsense on filmstories.co.uk, be it the Friday quiz or an open letter to Universal pitching what franchises the Fast and Furious series should cross over with in its sequels, including Back to the Future, the Bourne films, and the Flintstones. But yeah, mostly that, and then you find me on Blue Sky, it's just markharrison.bsky.social.
You can find me on Letterboxd just by searching for Graham Williamson, and I'm on Instagram at Graham W Films. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with Steve McQueen's Blitz, in which Paul Weller has to go down in the tube station at midnight. Oh yes. But until then, that's your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
I've been Mark. Did she do it, Graham? Answer yes or no. Bye, everybody.